Hello and welcome. Today I'm going to be mainly focusing on two new makeup products. So I have the new NARS Light Reflecting Foundation. I had a little sample of that, so I'm going to be demoing that and sharing my thoughts on that foundation today. And I'm also going to be demoing and reviewing the new shade of the Patrick Ta blush duo. It's the Double Take Cream and Powder Blush, and I have the shade She's Blushing, which is a brand new shade. So I'm going to be demoing that, reviewing it, doing some comparison, sharing my thoughts on both of those products. So if you'd like to see all of that, just keep on watching. I wanted to try out this new NARS foundation. You've probably heard of it and seen other people reviewing it by now, but this is the Light Reflecting Foundation. It doesn't have hyaluronic acid in it, and Sephora was doing a little promo where they had a few shades to choose from, and if you spent $25 or $35, you could get a little sample. So I chose the lightest shade that was available, which is, I think, shade 2 Mont Blanc. Yeah, light 2 Mont Blanc. So this will be a little too dark for me, but I have actually gone through a whole NARS foundation in this shade before, so it's not going to be too far off, but it'll definitely be too dark. But I think that the undertones of this shade are quite good for me, so I'm just going to go right in and get some of that on my skin. I'll just do one side at a time so we can see the difference. I'm going to start on this side with a brush. This is my Sonia G Jumbo Base, my favorite foundation brush. Blend that right in. So you can see it's definitely darker than my neck. It matches my face pretty well, actually, but I have a lot of redness and discoloration on my face, so it's quite a lot darker than my neck. But you can see the comparison there with versus without the foundation. It looks really nice. I've heard great things about this foundation, so I was really excited to be able to get this little sample. I'm actually gonna blend this down on my neck just so it looks a little bit more normal. And now I'm just gonna do the other side of my face with a sponge. I have my dampened Real Technique sponge here. And I'm just gonna pat over the side I used the brush for with the sponge, just because I want it to really sink in, and there were some spots where it was a little bit streaky from the brush. I didn't wear any primer today, but I have a very thick moisturizer. I have the Nivea cream on my face today, so I think the foundation and the cream just kind of need a little bit more help to kind of sink right into the skin, but I'm really happy with how this is looking. I do think I got a bit more coverage on the brush side, especially right here. I'm just seeing that the pores look a little bit more covered and less prominent, where the pores right here are looking a little bit more noticeable, but at the same time it looks a little bit more natural on this side too. So I think it just kind of depends on what you're going for in terms of the look. But I'm just going to build up a little bit right there, and that'll probably give me the same effect that I'm getting on the other side. This looks absolutely gorgeous on the skin. I'm seeing my shoulders here, so I think I'm gonna have to put some foundation on my shoulders, or just put a sweater on. I'll put a different top on so my arms are covered, because they look extremely white compared to the rest of what's going on here. So aside from the shade, I mean, this would probably be a good summer shade for me, and I do like the undertone quite a lot, but it's definitely too dark for my winter skin. And this is one of the issues that kept me from actually buying the full size of this foundation when it came out, because I find the NARS shades are a little bit tricky. The lightest 3 shades in their foundations tend to be Siberia, which is very light but with very, very yellow undertones, which is just too yellow for me. Shade 2 is Oslo, which I've actually never tried, but it looks extremely pink. And then the next one is this one, Mont Blanc, which is a more neutral undertone. So I just wish they had a super light shade that's kind of in the range of Siberia or even lighter that has the same undertone as this one. So it's a little bit tricky, but I would be curious maybe to try Oslo and see if that works. Hopefully it wouldn't be too pink for me. But I think that this foundation looks absolutely gorgeous. It does have that real light reflecting quality, and it feels very light on the skin. It's very thin, but gives a really good amount of coverage. So really happy with this so far, but this is just my first impressions. So we'll have to see how it wears and everything, but so far, a very good impression of this foundation. So now I'm gonna add a little bit of concealer. I'll do that off camera, and then I'm gonna come back and we'll play with the new Patrick Ta blush duo in She's Blushing. So I've added some concealer and a little bit of powder. I use my Armani Power Fabric Concealer in the shade 1, which is a very light shade, so I kind of use that to brighten up certain areas. And then I used my Fenty Soft Matte Powder in 100, which again is very light, to set down where I had put the concealer. And then I used my Gucci powder in 00.5, which is just a little bit slightly darker than the Fenty one, just to set pretty much everywhere else. I normally don't set my cheek area, but today I just put a tiny little bit of that Gucci powder on it because I'm going to be going straight on with the powder blush. So I just wanted to have a little bit of an easier canvas to work on. But when I was applying that NARS foundation, I was thinking that the shade actually reminded me a lot of the shade 4 of the Lisa Eldridge foundation. So I did a little comparison here. There's the Lisa Eldridge in shade 4 and there's the NARS. In terms of the formula, the NARS is a much thinner formula, whereas the Lisa Eldridge has quite a kind of moussey feel to it. It's not thick per se, but it is thicker and moussier. You can see the finishes are quite different. These aren't fully dried down yet, but you can already tell that the NARS is more luminous and toward that dewy side of the spectrum, which I'm really pleased about. Whereas the Lisa Eldridge is very matte on my skin, not in a bad way, but it just really wants to turn into a matte foundation on me. And then looking at the colors, which is why I originally wanted to do this comparison, you can see that the NARS in Mont Blanc is a little bit cooler than Lisa Eldridge shade 4. I think shade 4 in Lisa Eldridge is described as having neutral undertones or neutral peach undertones. And it looks quite a lot more yellowy golden than the NARS, which is pulling a lot more kind of cool pinky in comparison. But I do think that the depths of those two shades are very similar, just different types of undertones and of course different finishes. So now let's get into the blush. So with these Patrick Ta blush duos, you're meant to start with the powder first and then go in with the cream. So I'm just going to take my favorite blush brush, which is the Sonia G Classic Cheek, right into the blush powder. And this is not my first time using this, so I have pretty well-formed thoughts on this little blush duo. I do find, I kind of wish that the powders and the creams even in these Patrick Ta duos were a little more lightly pigmented. I find them to be quite strongly pigmented, and especially when you have a product where you're meant to use 2 layers, so you're meant to use the powder layer and the cream layer at the same time. To me, it would make sense for these to be a little bit more lightly pigmented because you're going to be building that color necessarily if you're applying it the way it's meant to be applied. And it just makes sense to me that it should be less pigmented, but I understand that he is trying to create products that will work for a very wide range of skin tones. And so for those skin tones that aren't pale white like mine, they would need more pigment. But it does keep me from trying more shades of these duos because I just think they're going to be way too much for me. As much as I like blush, there's a limit to how much I can have on my face. So that's just a couple dips into the pan to cover both cheeks, and you can see that I have quite a flush going on here. For the cream layer, I like to go in with my sponge, so I'm just using the other side of the same sponge I used for my foundation. And I just kind of gently tap that on top, on the apples of the cheeks. And it does create a very nice effect. The cream adds in that dewiness and luminosity that may have been lost a little bit with the powder. And the two formulas paired together really does create a blush that lasts all day. The days I've worn this duo, I've worn it all day long, sometimes with a mask on for a fairly extended period. It's been basically as strong at the end of the day as it is probably within about half an hour of applying. It does kind of sink in and fade a tiny little bit within the first half hour or so after applying, which is good because it can be a lot. So it does kind of mesh in and look a little bit more natural. I think the color is really beautiful, and I think I have only one other of these duos, which is She's So LA. I'm gonna try to find it. I don't know if I still have it. I might have given it away, I'm not sure. But in that one, the powder is completely matte to my memory. This powder definitely has a sheen to it. You can see that shine there, which I really like. I kind of prefer a little bit of a soft sheen to, especially for a powder blush, because I think it just looks more natural and more luminous on the skin, which is my preference. So there are the two formulas there. That's the cream and that is the powder. And again, this is the shade She's Blushing. I did find She's So LA. I still had it. Let me hold them up next to each other. There's She's So LA and there's She's Blushing. You can see that She's So LA is much browner. And I was right that the powder is really a matte in that She's So LA duo. So here are some swatches for some comparisons. Here's the She's So LA duo compared to She's Blushing. And again, you can see that real browniness in the She's So LA shade that the She's Blushing doesn't have. This is Salt New York's Rose, which is actually a quite similar tone. It's a little bit cooler and more pinky than She's Blushing. And this is Westman Atelier in Mimi, which looks quite similar in the swatch, but I can tell you from experience that it's a much more subtle color on the face. It's a little bit more nude and toned down than She's Blushing. I do find that Mimi is actually quite different when you apply it on the face. It just has a much more subtle kind of soft effect. Whereas although She's Blushing is a fairly neutral tone in terms of how it plays with the skin, it is much more impactful in terms of the pigment and the color that's showing up on the skin. So I think I'm gonna do my eyes off camera actually, and then I'll just come back and round up my thoughts on everything. All right, so I finished my makeup and I just wanted to round up my thoughts on these two new products that I've tried. The NARS foundation I think is beautiful. I love that it has that dewier finish, and I've really been looking for a foundation with that type of a finish that doesn't have hyaluronic acid in it. So I'm very excited about that. The shade I tried, Mont Blanc, is definitely too dark for me, although I do like the undertone. But I am curious to try the shade Oslo. Although it looks very pink, I think it would be lighter and hopefully a little bit more appropriate for my skin tone. So I will potentially be buying that, depending on how everything goes with the wear of this foundation and so on. But so far, really super happy with it. I think it gives a beautiful coverage, really nice, thin, lightweight formula, and I really have no complaints about it other than the shade. The Patrick Ta blush I'm happy with. As I mentioned, I do wish that it were just less pigmented, both the cream and the powder. I could really do with a very subtly pigmented version of these duos, and I think that would be much better suited to me and to people with fair skin in general. But I understand that he's trying to cover a wide range of skin tones with these products, so it makes sense that they are the way they are. I think for fair skin, this duo, She's Blushing, is probably the best shade just because it seems to be the lightest and most subtle. I think it's going to work for most skin tones though, because it's quite a sort of neutral type of blush tone. It can go with lots of different looks and work on lots of different skin tones. It's that kind of classic rosy blush type of color. A little bit of brown in it, a little bit of warmth, but not too warm, and just that type of tone that goes with so many different looks. So that's it for this video. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know if you have any questions or comments down below. If you'd like to see more from me and you haven't subscribed to my channel already, I would really love for you to do so. Thank you again so much for watching. Take care, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.